Within the space of a few weeks of the moon landing in 1969 was the iconic music festival at Woodstock, when something like 400,000 people gathered in the mud for several days of music. It was something greater than had ever happened before. It wasn't just an event, it was now the Woodstock generation.
This self-indulgent, wealthy elite that's decided to become a bunch of modern-day bohemians and rewrite all the rules of our society.
In the aftermath of Woodstock, once again the elite news media rushed in to give it cosmic significance. Time magazine said that Woodstock, quote, may well rank as one of the significant political and sociological events of the age. It is the proclamation of a new set of values. The pleasure principle has been elevated over the Puritan ethic of work. To do one's own thing is a greater duty than to be a useful citizen. Personal freedom in the midst of squalor is more liberating than social conformity with the trappings of wealth. Now that youth takes abundance for granted, it can afford to reject materialism. The children of plenty have voiced an intention to live by a different ethical standard than their parents accepted.
Standing in this same place, a third of a century ago, Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation ravaged by depression. Our crisis today is in reverse.
The 1960s saw the rise of youth culture. America had become so wealthy through its free enterprise system that young people had huge disposable incomes for the first time. All of a sudden, they became the center of the universe. And you had a reversal of what for centuries was a traditional structure of authority, which was that older people knew more than younger people, and they were revered for their wisdom.
One of the awful things that happened in the 1960s was the sense, that phrase, you can't trust anybody over 30. What it meant is you can't trust any civilization beyond our present time horizon.
And there was a kind of schizophrenia going on in the country. One side was operating on, I'd call, tragic premises, that there were certain limitations to the human experience. We had certain appetites we didn't want to indulge in. We worry about our public name. We worry about our daughter and our son living up to the reputation of our parents, our grandparents. We go to the cemetery. All of these were very pedestrian protocols, and they're easy to caricature, but slowly over time, they create the stuff of civilization. And there was this ongoing therapeutic movement, mostly among young people, that with enough education, with enough good intentions, with enough money, with enough egalitarianism, that the world as we knew it had no limitations, that we could have internal peace, we could have internal beauty, we could have eternal niceness everywhere.
Wally, does the story of Pandora have any particular significance for you? You know, her curiosity and doing things she was told not to do?
People really misunderstand the 1950s. They think in terms of like June Cleaver and Donna Reed, as if everybody was discriminating against women, forcing them to stay at home. But that isn't it at all. They grew up during the Great Depression. They were surrounded by death. They were surrounded by starvation. They were surrounded by bankruptcies, homelessness. Just to survive, they had to go to a soup kitchen. These same young women, their brothers, their uncles, their fathers were tortured on the Bataan Death March, were slaughtered like fish in a barrel on the beaches of Normandy. They were tremendously traumatized by that. And the main objective is that their kids would never have to go through anything like that again. These are mothers who had suffered their whole lives. They considered a home with a white picket fence to be the dream of a lifetime. They lavished enormous amount of love on their kids. They gave them anything they wanted, gave them all the attention they wanted. So these kids pretty much grew up getting their own way.
The main characteristic of the 60s generation was moral self-righteousness, and they believed that they had spotted endemic and almost ineradicable flaws in American society.
So they rebelled. They rebelled against their parents. Girls who had been taught by their mothers to be modest decided to flaunt their sexuality. Boys who had been taught to look great and keep their hair short began to grow their hair long and become hippies.
And so the substantive issues were superseded by a wallowing in narcissism, a belief that they were the first generation in history that had a moral sense and had the capacity to tell adults how they should lead their lives.
This was a time of incredible radicalism. Our institutions, the educational institutions, the cultural institutions, the moral and social institutions, churches, families, and so on, they really did undergo a kind of transformation, a revolution, if you will. It transformed us inside.
The destructive aspects of the culture of narcissism was the idea that you couldn't expect individuals to live up to traditional moral standards.
And immediately we lost our connection with the past. It was a betrayal by the elites that's, I wonder if it has any precedent in history when a generation so turned off the light switch of the past.
There was another more hardcore radical group that saw the narcissism of the hippies as a diversion. Saul Alinsky, for example, was a radical organizer who had real disdain for the hippies. They didn't have the commitment to raw power.
Saul Alinsky's main motto was speak truth to power. And the presumption was that America is a fundamentally racist society, a sexist society, a society committed to inequality, a society that serves only the wealthy.
When you look at the Alinsky group, you realize this is a group that it's ultimately about achieving power.
All of his techniques and so forth were based on this presumption that he was dealing with an essentially evil society.
Saul Alinsky said that the elites had Machiavelli's The Prince. Radicals and the people had Rules for Radicals.
Rules for Radicals teaches the dark art of destroying your political adversaries.
The reality is that an entire generation of activists took this up. People that were in positions of influence in government recognized the value of the Alinsky method and used it to advance their social agenda, which ended up being very destructive for this country. And this is really the Bible for activists, because it provides a path to establishing and achieving power. In a book that really is amoral, it says that there are no moral constraints.
If you're dealing with an evil society, then that licenses you to extreme practices. It allows you to assault individuals on a personal level, to vilify them.
The only way you can change an evil society is to bankrupt that society. Two professors at Columbia University, Cloward and Piven, developed such a strategy called the crisis strategy. The essence of the Cloward-Piven strategy was to sabotage and destroy the capitalist system by creating bureaucratic demands, excessive regulations, and entitlements that would lead to economic ruin, economic collapse, and bankruptcy. Once you've reached that point of bankruptcy, that society is ripe for revolutionary change.
The basic presumption that America is, at its heart, an evil society. And so therefore, we are warranted, we are licensed. We are doing a good thing when we attack it, when we disrupt it.
Disruption is at the center of the Cloward-Piven strategy. Disruption comes from the outside, but also from the inside of the system. And the inside was far more effective and far more important. By the late 1990s, the left had taken over many of the institutions of power, meaning government, media, and academia. And it was from these places and positions of power that they were able to disrupt the system and implement a strategy that was designed to ultimately undermine the capitalist system.
Edmund Burke famously said, society is indeed a contract, but it's a very special one. It's a contract between the dead, the living, and those who are yet to be born. We inherit it a civilization from those who went before us and gave it to us, and we are to transmit it.
We are a bridge between our parents and grandparents on the one side and our children and grandchildren on the other side.
We owe a duty now to the past who taught us the wisdom from which we draw today. And then we have a duty to the future because our decisions today affect their liberty.
We have to transcend ourselves, and we owe some people who gave us the freedom and the material prosperity who are now dead.
The 60s were a revolution that took out our sense of responsibility to the past and our sense of responsibility to the future. And that's why the 60s remain so important and so devastating